We're really excited to have you. And in interest of full disclosure, Professor Oliveira and I know each other outside of Boston College as well, because she does research at the elementary school where my daughter goes. So this is going to be a lot of fun for all of us. And I just wanted to start out with a first kind of background question about you, who you are, how you got your journey to become a professor, what led you in this direction, and just a little bit about your story. So we'd love to hear that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. This is one of my favorite things to do, even though, we can't be in person or see everybody. I really hope that you feel comfortable to even email me if you want anything post this conversation. If you're interested in anything that we talk about here, but you want to expand on it, please feel free to contact me. So I am assistant professor, as Susan said, at the Lynch School of Education. I am from Brazil. I'm from Sao Paulo originally. And I've been in the US now for 13 years. So I came to the US to do my master's, and I did my master's in international relations at Columbia University. And I thought I was going to work at the UN. And, I thought I was going to be a diplomat. But then I quickly figured out that I wanted to say things that sometimes diplomats have to, not say. So I went and did my master's at Columbia University because I wanted to work with microfinance. And for those of you who don't know, microfinance is a form of small lending that works particularly well in the developing world, in places like Brazil, and in India and in Bangladesh. That's where it all started. And it's this mode of lending money to a small group of people. And then if one person can't pay, the rest of the group will pay for that person. So it kind of has this community type way of thinking about how people can become entrepreneurs, right? Even if they don't have a lot of money to start. So I did that work. I went to Mexico to do that work. And then while I was there, I got really interested in studying a little bit deeper about migration patterns, because I was wondering in Mexico, where are, some of the parents? And I found out that they had migrated to the US, and then the children were in Mexico with the grandparents. So I decided to do a PhD and keep studying that. And then my PhD was in anthropology and education at Teachers College, Columbia University, also in New York City. And when I finished my PhD, I taught in New York for a little bit at a community college that had other universities there. And then the Boston College opportunity came up and I applied, and it worked out. And I've been here now. I'm starting my 4th year as assistant professor. And I really, I feel so lucky that I ended up being able to, get this opportunity and come here. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I ended up here.
And talk to us a little bit about your research now and your kind of focus now, and how that translate into some courses that you've been teaching.
Yes, thank you. So one of the things, so my original research back when I was a PhD student, I know I'm talking like I'm, back in the day, but when I was, a graduate student doing my PhD, my research, I was really interested in, especially the women who had left Mexico, migrated to the US, who are undocumented in the United States. So they can't go back and forth. So they couldn't go back and see their children, right? But they came with the narrative of doing that for the education of their children, right? They wanted to come here so they could give their children a better education. So I was really interested in researching that aspect. What does it mean to provide a good education, right? What is, kind of this idea that parents have also that in the US, that's going to be more advantageous from a job perspective, from a school perspective, right? So I was really interested in this idea of parenting across borders and how people here, families here, are still connected with the families who stayed behind. So now I teach, one of my favorite classes to teach is a class that I co-teach for freshmen. So maybe, it'd be great if you would all be interested in taking that class. It's a class called Citizenship, Immigration, and Belonging. Can Education Save Us? Which is very dramatic, but it's part of the core curriculum at BC, and it's a complex problem class, which is a big class, but we also have small sessions. And all of my research, understanding the everyday lives of people and families and and children who are immigrants trying to get through school and everything. All of that has, really led me to teach about citizenship, immigration, and how people feel that they belong, and how in the end of the day, education and schooling can be such a crucial part of your identity, right? That can kind of be bigger sometimes than some of your other identities, if you feel that you've put so much work in making sure your children have the better future. So that was kind of the bridge from that, to that. The other class that I teach that I also really enjoy, which is for more advanced undergrads, it's called Psychological Responses to Humanitarian Crises. So you can imagine that that would be unfortunately very popular, in the sense that we are, living in a crisis in terms of, for not just in this country, but across the world, my home country of Brazil as well. So understanding how, as, practitioners, we can respond to these crises, and what strategies we can have in terms of school, health, social justice, and all these other things. I also think it's really important. So these classes are really kind of continuation of what my research has allowed me, to kind of dig in and learn more.
And since you've been at BC for about 4 years now, can you talk
Yes,
a
four
little bit
years.
about about BC students and your experiences with them in your classroom? What are they like? What do you enjoy about working with them?
Yes, I love my BC students. And when we finished the class last fall, this class that I described as citizenship, immigration, and belonging, and I was very much, in the end of the semester, I was very much like, I'm gonna miss you guys. And they were like, okay, thank you. But I remained in touch with at least 2 dozens of my previous students, and I have, three or four of them are working with me as research assistants. One of my best research assistants, Ginny, she was my student from that class as a freshman, right? And now she's in this research team with folks who are doing their PhDs, their masters, and she's really involved. So my favorite thing about working with BC students is that our relationship doesn't stop in the classroom, right? That it's something that goes beyond, and we keep talking about issues that are happening in the world, and we keep exchanging articles or news things or interviews that we think it's interesting. And I still hold office hours, and all of them can still come and, continue the conversation. But I think BC students are really dedicated to the bigger picture of what they're doing and what they're studying. They're really connected with the mission of thinking about, what's my role in the world and how can I contribute, right, for the betterment of society. And that's something that for me is it's very dear to my heart, especially now. I always feel very moved about the lengths that students are taking in order to keep working and keep volunteering and keep doing, all this amazing work, even with so many constraints. So I think that the laser focus on, yes, academic rigor and being really good, doing all the readings, as professors are always like, are you doing all the readings? And doing the homework and everything, that's one part. But the other part is understanding that that class fits into a larger picture, and they should be able to get from that class the tools that they want to do the job that they want to do eventually in their careers. So I think that they're very good about, doing that, figuring that out.
And in terms of your teaching style and working with students and mentoring and those kinds of things, how has that kind of progressed for you? Because a lot of times when you are getting a PhD and while you're doing some teaching,
Mhm.
not necessarily the main focus of some folks is the teaching aspect of being a professor. So talk a little bit like how your teaching style has developed and how you've kind of moved your mentoring as well.
Yes. I think that when I was, so just to give you an idea, right, not to keep talking about how old I am, but I came to the US when I was 23. And then I did my master's in a couple of years. And then I started my PhD at 25. And then my first class that I ever taught during my PhD, I was 26. And I was teaching sometimes because I was teaching in the master's program, and some of my students were older than me. And I think that there's a lot of me that felt, insecure in the beginning because there's, that age difference and people had more experience. And I had to I always felt a huge pressure to really know my material really well, right? To be able to teach that really well. So I cursed a lot. I wanted that to come out. And I'm also, an immigrant person from Brazil. English is my second language. So I was always kind of in my head about how do I make sure that they're getting the best and they're understanding everything. And I think this has evolved to the point of me being very comfortable with what I bring to the table and what I can learn from students. And I think the biggest thing for any instructor or professor is not to think that you know everything, and that your relationship with students should be one that is reciprocal, that you're learning from them and you're teaching and you're learning, and that should be a cycle. So I think that being really comfortable with this idea of, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Let's discuss, what makes you think that? Let's, kind of go through this. So I think for my teaching was kind of this evolution of maybe starting very much like focus on the text and the curriculum, to kind of thinking about, as human beings in the world, what can we get from what we're reading? How can we critique it, right? I'm also kind of a stickler for, you have to really know the material before you say you don't like it, right? So it's like what I tell my kids. You can't look at the food and say, I don't like it. Try it. If you don't like it, that's okay with me, but you got to give it a try, right? So I think that's always been my thing with teaching. This may not look like a nice thing for you to read. You may think it's really hard, or you may think it's really easy. Give it a try, and if you don't like it, that's okay with me. And for the mentoring part, I've always also taken pride in mentoring folks very closely. And I have, folks from all walks of life, international, domestic, East Coast, West Coast, middle of the US, South, North, wherever. And I really like to keep my relationship with mentoring. I always say this: I would never ask you to do something I wouldn't myself do, right? So in this, again, in this relationship of mentoring, if I'm like, listen, I need you to go back and do more of this reading, or I need you to talk to this person so then you can expand that area of expertise, it's also because it's something I would do. And I'm very protective of, the students that I mentor, and really all the students that I have in my class and I get to know. And I think that that's something that I feel like I want them to feel comfortable with me, and they're able to come to me from something that could be a mental health piece, right? That I think it's a crucial part in teaching and mentoring, that you have a good relationship, that students can come to you and say, I'm having a lot of anxiety, I'm having a hard time finishing this assignment, and you can work through, these issues, instead of sometimes you only find that out in the end of the semester because sometimes the student wasn't comfortable talking to you, right? So for me, that's also another part of teaching and mentoring, having that very open back and forth, right, between the students and myself.
Absolutely. And because you've taught first year students,
Yes.
do you find that they come to you, that they are comfortable coming to professors and to you about any of these kinds of issues? And how do you help them if they're having the academic difficulties? And certainly if they're kind of having those transitions to college, what resources have you been able to provide for them?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that it really depends. I think that it really depends on where the students finished their high school, right? So sometimes I feel that there are schools that students were already doing a lot of self-advocacy, like they were already going to teachers, right? Like asking for extra help or asking for this or advocating for themselves. And then there's some other schools that I feel like are more rigid about that. So then the students, when they start their first semester in college, they feel nervous or uncomfortable about coming to office hours, right? Office hours is really something that it's one of my biggest advices, right? For when you start in college, wherever you go to your professor's office hours. That's when the professor gets to know you. That's when the professor gets to establish a relationship with you. So don't be afraid, even if you go and you knock on the door and you're like, I actually don't know if I have any questions, but I wanted to meet you, and I think that's so valid and so important. So I think that that's something that, when the students start, I try to have them, even I put in my syllabus, you must come to my office hours. That's like part of, I'll give you get points for coming to my office hours. And I think that's something that you train folks in the first year so that in the second year, they're doing that on their own. But again, there's a difference between depending on what kind of high school experience you had. Sometimes international students, right, are taught a different way to participate in classrooms or a different way to talk to professors. So it's also really important to spell that out from the beginning and not jump into just the content, but on the, the social norms of how it is, how it's so important to also use those other moments for you to be, more comfortable. Because I have found this, and I don't have enough data to support it, but that's my hunch from over teaching for 10 years, is that whenever the students that start going to office hours, they participate more in class. That has been my experience because they see me in a different light, right? Which then if I ask a question, the hand will go up and they'll try and answer, even if the answer is incomplete or not complete, maybe there is a part that was a misunderstanding. I think it's something that you got to practice being okay with feeling vulnerable and embracing that moment. And college makes you vulnerable, right? Because there's so many clubs and so many new friendships and being away from home. So I think that there's like some of that I think is really important to kind of work through in terms of habits.
Keep forgetting I'm mute these days. And actually, we just got a great question in chat from Jess, who was wondering how your story influences the lives of your students.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I think that I am always, hopefully you can tell by our 20 minutes together so far, and maybe Susan can attest to that, but I'm very, very transparent. And I'm a very, you'll know how I feel about things and my thoughts are, and I'm very open to that. And I think that that's a huge part of teaching and learning, is being okay living in your own skin and your body and, inhabiting who you are. So I think that my story of, coming to the US, and I had to learn when I was a master's student. I didn't know how to participate in classrooms because my education, I did my bachelor's in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. And it was very much lecture style that I didn't have much opportunity to participate. And it felt very hierarchical with my professors. And that's how I was socialized. So then in my master's, it took me I remember taking a semester in and I was like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to participate. Like there's some seminar classrooms that are 10 people. Like I'm going to have to raise my hand. In the 70 people, if technically, if you're sitting somewhere, you can hide. Not in my classes though, because I memorize everybody's names. So I think that I bring that to the table when I'm teaching. And I'll say that, listen, I understand having to figure out and to learn how to be a student in this modality. And it's okay. And I'm up for a challenge and you telling me that you need help more than, if you just don't check out. That's the only thing I'll say, based on my experience. But I definitely think there's a huge overlap with, my story and how I try to show that to the students as something that, it's not like I understand what they're going through exactly, but I also have a story that has made me question and feel insecure about a bunch of things, in my life.
Thank you. Let's jump into research for a little bit, because you mentioned earlier that you have undergrads who help you with research. So
Yes.
how does that happen? Do they come to you? Do you go to them? And talk a little bit more about, again, pre-pandemic time and maybe post-pandemic time.
Yeah.
How have you been able to conduct research, because you do so much needs of observation in the kind of research that you do? How has that affected what you've been doing research-wise?
So much. So I'll just quickly, I'll tell you about, I have two big research projects that I have right now. And I have started at the Lynch School of Education, I have started a lab that is called the Immigrant Education Experience Lab. It goes by IEL. And currently I have 7 students that work with me and 3 are undergrads. I also have another project that we call the Home Project, which all of my students, all 6 students, were recruited from the class that I taught. So they were freshmen, first semester, who are now doing research with me for this other project. But under the IEL umbrella, which is the Immigrant Education Experience Lab, I have a project which, as Susan said, I'm in a district here in Massachusetts, and I'm looking how a dual language program is implemented in a school and how it changes the entire school, right? How it changes culture, how it changes instruction, how it changes, funding, policies, so many things, but also how it impacts families and students and teachers. So I've been there now for 2.5 years, in this particular district doing research. And before, I was there physically in the classrooms. I would sit in the classrooms, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, now third grade, and I'd sit with the students, sit in the round tables, take notes, record some interviews, interview teachers. I would go to every parent teacher conference, right? I would be there for every event. So it was very much, my presence. And I'm an anthropologist by training. And for those of you who are not familiar with the discipline, it's a social science discipline. And the focus is to study, the human condition. So basically how and why human beings do what they do. So the main method to study that is what we call ethnography, which means that you're always there. You're accompanying people, you're doing observations. So your presence is really your tool to collect data. So up until March 13th, I was, in classrooms in people's homes doing research. And then when schools shut down, and I also had to figure out, with my own family, supporting my own kids, there was a little bit of, a stop. And then the way that I went back to doing this was using, all of the social network tools. So WhatsApp is a huge communication, right? Like a chat on your phone. So I do that a lot with families. FaceTime a lot. Facebook, Messenger, text messages, whatever you can think about, I've been doing that. And with the teachers in this district, I've been doing observations online. So I also log in when the teachers are teaching. My face is there and I'm talking to the kids and I'm taking notes and doing other things. I also do surveys, which is another way it doesn't need myself to be there, but it's another way to kind of collect that data. So to participate and do work with me, I've done both. I've had students who have come to me and said, hey, I'm really interested in this topic. What can I do? And if I have space, I'll interview, we'll talk about and see if it's a good fit, in terms of the things to do. If I don't have space and I can't pay, I'll still say, listen, if you want, you can start doing this small work. It'll still go on your CV. You can still talk about it and participate. But right now, if I can't pay you, or if you can't be, a research assistant in one particular way, we're always trying to find a way. If people want to be part of it, I'm very committed to finding ways to do that. I have, a student who was in my class, Ayana Wallace. She was in my class last fall. She's a phenomenal student. And I've been trying to get her to work with me, but she has a job that she's already at her 20 hours. And so we've been doing this back and forth. And then finally now I'm able to get her to do, a couple hours a week working with me. So, and then because I have an external grant, I'm able to pay for those hours, right, for her as a stipend. So she's already doing her work on campus. So that's added to that as like a short-term research opportunity. So for that project that she's working on with me is for, families who were separated at the border and have now been reunified in Massachusetts. And I'm looking at how these parents are navigating educational systems for their kids once they've been reunified. So these are asylum seekers who were sometimes separated for 60 to 90 days, children as young as 5, right, from parents. So looking at trauma and the psychosocial aspects and effects of separation and how education becomes this beacon of hope, right, that things will change and be better if you have a good education. So that was a long answer, but you get it, you get the picture. So Susan, please cut me off if you need to, okay, because I can talk.
No, we appreciate the talking for sure. Don't even worry about it. And we just got 2 great questions at 3 now up in chat. And so Kate wanted to know, what's been your favorite lesson or unit to teach within the citizenship, immigration, and belonging in the United States course, and why?
Yeah, so my favorite unit, I think, has been on teaching about the border. It's the border between the US and Mexico, and talking about, how that is, it can be such a hot topic and a place that so many people are talking about, but it's really important to look at the human experience and how so much of what's happening at the border, there's a historical context as to why, right? That is really important to understand. So I love talking to students about, it's really easy for us to do a blame game and point fingers and say it's this person's fault or that person's fault. But I think it's really important to look at the history and say, what have been, what are the things that have been done by the Mexican government, the US government over time, not just in the last few years or something. So I'm always, and the students are really into it because they're so surprised by some of the findings, because sometimes we just get our face in the news and we don't look at, some of the histories of some of these aspects. So I've loved, to teach on border issues between US and Mexico.
That's awesome. I want to take that class, by the way. I've heard about it a few times now, and I've watched a few webinars, and I want to take it. I might jump in next year. So Leslie's asking, has there been an instance where a student has changed your view on life, or maybe even just some issue that you've been teaching about?
Yes. Oh, I love that question. There is actually an example that I think that, students sometimes, when I'm teaching about something that I'm so passionate about and I know really well, you have spots that you didn't think through, because sometimes, you're reading that and you're in it. And I've had students, ask me some super challenging questions during class that I've had to say, I'm going to have to think about it. Like, I actually don't have an answer for you right now. Let me think about it. And it was when we were talking about in the citizenship, immigration, and belonging class, we were talking about national boundaries and why do nations exist, right? Why do countries exist? Why are borders important? Right? Why do people, and not just in the US, but across the world, right? Wars have been waged because of borders, right? It's such a big thing. And then one of my students asked about, knowing that I was from Brazil, the student asked about the Amazon. And he said, well, should Brazil be responsible for taking care of the Amazon? Or because it's something that the whole world, the world depends on it, should be something more like as a common good. So, and I thought it was such an interesting and savvy play on a public good, which is, a florist, right? Like or like the environment, is that a public good? Like oceans are a public good, or it belongs to all of us, we all need it. But if it's within a boundary, who has jurisdiction, right? Who takes care of that, and who's responsible for doing that? So then the following class, that was on a Monday. Then on Wednesday, when we met again, I started with a map of the Amazon. And I was like, I know you all read something, but let's dig into this for like 10 minutes. Okay, let's get through this. So I think that, it was a really good moment to be responsive, to run a classroom that is responsive to what students are interested in, that is not just a top-down approach of this is my syllabus, take it. But what are some of the issues that students are interested in that we can hone in with the theoretical frameworks and the concepts we're learning in class, right? So I still remember that, and I'm very fond of that student. So it was a great moment.
Again, I definitely need to jump into your class a couple times next fall. So to switch to the pandemic a little bit, BC has brought our students back to campus, and they are taking courses, but in a variety of styles: hybrid, remote, in person. So a question that we had prepared, and the student actually just asked as well, is how has the pandemic kind of affected teaching for you? And then also, we talked already about your research, but also like your ability to connect with students in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. So in one way, I have to say, connecting with students has been easier because we are able to find, there's no dislocation time. So it's not like I'm going to be on my office hours from 4 to 6 on Mondays, and if you don't catch me there and I'm not in my office, then we won't be able to meet, right? So I think that I've been able to have a lot more flexibility and have office hours, and then say, if you can't meet in these, I'm happy to jump in a call at like 6 p.m., 7 p.m., right? Because it'd be 20, 30 minutes. So I feel like it's easier for me to schedule these things because I can do online. So it actually expanded my ability, my bandwidth to be able to engage with more students than I did in the past. The part that I think it's hard is when you're teaching, one of the main moments that students want to talk to you is before and after class. So I usually get to class 10 to 15 minutes prior, right, to teaching. And students come and talk to me. They check in with things. They confirm an assignment. They, things that they don't want to raise their hands. So, and that's fine. And I love that. And then post class, they linger. And then sometimes we would walk to my office. Let's walk together. Let's keep talking, right? And so that part with the class is tough because the classes are scheduled really close and they can't, even if I leave my Zoom on, I can't, they shouldn't stay there. They should try to get to their other class because they may actually have to go physically. And they may be in their dorm, for example, right, in their room, and then they have to leave and go to a class. So I can't really, that is a little harder. So I have to make more time in class to have more Q&A about how things are going. Let's check in. So you got to build that in as opposed to depending on those, how it ends. But I'd say that with the office hours and contact, I feel like, with the WhatsApp and now we have group chats, that it's like me and 7 others, and that's how we check in, and things that I didn't do before, right? That it was very much like you come to the office and you do this, you do that. But now it just feels actually that the communication is a lot more fluid and frequent. So I guess that is a good thing, given the pandemic.
I know we're all figuring out lots of creative ways to do
Right?
all of this.
Yeah.
Right now feels very frustrating. I think for people who are used to the old ways, but I think there's some lights at the end of the tunnel here where I see some real advantages of what we've learned through all of
And
this.
you were saying, right, how even for you to like reach sometimes populations that sometimes would be really hard, you can now.
Right. Yeah. So there are some pluses to all of this that we're all going through.
Yeah.
We had a great question from Elizabeth who would like to know. I mean, I think this really gets at the heart of the Lynch School. That there's some students who they come in, they know they want to work with children, but whether or not it's teaching in the classroom or in human development, they're just not sure how they want to work with children. How do you and other professors help them find the right avenue for them?
So I think the first thing to think about is, I always say that to my students. Sometimes you start college and you have either a really stern idea about what your goal is, or you may be on the other end of the spectrum that you're like, let me just see where this takes me, right? Just they're both fine. I think that giving yourself time to, in your first year to kind of think through and see what classes you gravitate towards and take a risk, take a class that maybe wasn't on your radar necessarily, but then, somebody told you about and somebody really recommended that. So try something that is new and feels like out of your comfort zone so that it can make you think about things that you didn't before. Working with children, for me has always been my passion. I never knew, like when I was younger, when I was doing my undergrad, I didn't know. I always liked it, but I never knew would I be good at it, right? Because that's the other thing. You may like something, but then you're like, well, I don't know if I'm good at it. Maybe I'll if I practice enough. And I think that becoming a teacher, right, the curriculum that you got to do at Lynch is different from for example, apply psychology or counseling, or if you're doing some other pieces of human development, right? And if you're going to become a teacher, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to do your practicum, which means you will be, in classrooms either virtually or in person if that becomes available, right? So you're going to be able to test it out and see how it feels to you, and then kind of think about, is that in me? Like, is that something that I want to do, or should I, or if there isn't, a lot of my students, they end up finding out about careers they didn't even know existed when they started. So they're like, I'm either a teacher, a school psychologist, or I can do some counseling for kids. But then there's like, well, there's something else. There's this position, right, in schools, or there's this piece with that works, with organizations that do after school programs with kids, or with kids at risk, or with immigrant kids, or with, there's so many things that you end up finding out, but you only find out if you allow yourself to, take a risk, go to a talk. There's so many events on campus, speakers come so much. And now with the online, if speakers are coming, maybe more people will be able to join if they couldn't make it because it overlapped with something. So I think that it's for me, my role and my colleagues, our role is to really try to say, okay, how do you like the classes on the topic that you're doing? How do you feel like you're doing in the classes, right? When you tried and you were around the kids and you're doing this work, how did it feel for you? Did you feel like you wanted to go back the next day, or were you kind of, thinking about maybe I want to try something else? So there's steps. So don't feel overwhelmed like, oh, it's a hit or miss. I either will do well or not, right? There's a process that you're going to be able to go through.
It's so true. I remember when I was in college at BC that I actually decided to try teaching, and went to a high school and did some student teaching and was like, oh no, 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 this is not for me. And that's very lucky for all those kids out there to this day that I do what I do instead.
Well, that's like my whole thing with my son. I have a 6-year-old, and here where we are, it's a hybrid model. So he's going to school one week and he's staying home the other week. And but if you are sons and daughters of school teachers in the district, you get to go full time. So he told me, why can't you be a teacher? And I was like, I am a teacher. And he's like, well, you're an adults teacher. That's not like you need to be, and I was like, oh, no, 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 no. That's really hard.
Exactly. We all know at some point in your life you start to realize, without that good reflection that we do at BC, like what you're good at. Not only what brings you joy, but what you're good at. And then
Totally.
the world
That is a great point. Not just what brings you joy, but what you're good at. Totally.
for sure. Well, we've got just a few more minutes, so I kind of wanted to wrap up with just a final question, because I think we've gotten to everything that we said in Q&A, and thank you everybody for your great questions. But just as people are kind of approaching this college process, unfortunately, in the middle of a pandemic and can't necessarily get to campuses and those kinds of things, any pieces of advice that you could give high school juniors or seniors about thinking about the college process and where they should end up and what should they think about as they're looking at colleges and universities?
Yeah. So I would say that the first thing is don't feel discouraged, right? Like the world may be feeling so uncertain, and so many of you already have gone through this in the spring, right? And so many things were not available for you already, and you've had to make huge changes. And it's a world that is, mostly, that's one of my things that I talk a lot about in my research, that the world is, mostly run by adults, and young folks and children have to really fight for their voice. So I just want to say that, know that we're so hopeful that you're out there and you're thinking about that, you're attending here today, that this is a huge step. The fact that you're here listening to this, asking questions, is it's a huge step to get to know, university. So I would encourage you to reach out to professors and to folks who work at the university that you're interested in, and ask, see if somebody would talk to you, see if somebody would hold, and maybe they'll direct you to a webinar or to something. But don't be afraid of sending an email to folks, picking up the phone and calling and asking questions. Nobody will do that for you necessarily, right? So try to really take ownership of that moment and say, let me really find out. But at the same time, don't feel discouraged, or don't feel overwhelmed, because in many ways, the principal here where my son goes to school, he says, we're not all in the same boat, but we're in the same storm, which I think it's a really good metaphor, right? Because our boats are different, right? And that's okay. But this storm that we're living through, if anything that I've learned from the kids that I work with, is that they're so resilient. And that makes me so hopeful for the future. That makes me so excited about, our college students that are still at it, that still want this for their future. So I prefer to stay with hope, than to anything else. So I would just tell you that don't feel bad about reaching out. Don't feel embarrassed. Reach out. If you need help drafting an email, I'm here too. If you want help, I'm happy to help. Ask another person who knows that well if you don't know, like, what's the right way to address somebody or to write an email, right? But just go for it. Don't hold back. Go for it, because we need you.
Absolutely. And on that note, I right now am going to put my email in chat in case anybody has any questions or needs anything. Can you do
Can
that?
you?
Or I have to?
Can I put mine too?
Can you? Or
Yeah.
Can you? Okay, good.
I'm gonna
I
write
think
it.
panelists and attendees. So I think we think we're doing it right. So please, for admission questions or anything that you all need, feel free to do that. And obviously, specifically for Lynch School and all the interesting courses and research that for the professor does, please reach out to her. But we want to thank you all for joining us today. And Gabby, I hope I see you in person.
I know, me too.
Either on campus or at my daughter's school. So
But it's such a treat to be able to see you, Susan.
I
I'm so
know we were so
excited that
excited to be able
got
to do this.
a little bit of time Saturday morning.
Exactly. It was a lot of fun. And thank you all for joining us too. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and we will see you all. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.